They called it Lincoln Block, once a proud little corner of the city, now a fractured shell of what it used to be. Graffiti-covered walls, broken streetlights, and sirens that cried more than the people living there. It was a neighborhood sinking, in silence except for the noise of trouble. After his retirement, Sergeant Raymond Ray Cutler didn't imagine he'd return to chaos. Not after 2 decades in the Army, 2 deployments in Iraq, and 1 shattered knee that cost him his last mission. He imagined peace, maybe a modest garden, mornings with strong coffee. Instead, he came home to disorder. Ray moved into his late brother's old brick house on 41st Street. The porch creaked, the mailbox was crooked, but it was home. What shocked him wasn't the house, but what had taken root around it. Teenagers raced to TVs through alleyways. Dealers ran street corners like checkpoints, and neighbors kept their heads low. At first, Ray tried to stay out of it. He nodded politely to Ms. Hargrove next door, helped Mr. Willis carry groceries. But the block didn't care. His uniform was gone, and the neighborhood didn't salute veterans. That changed the morning he saw a kid barely 15 pull a knife on another over a stolen vape. Ray was walking to the corner store when it happened. The knife glinted. The other kid didn't even flinch. Ray's voice cut through the street like a gunshot. "Hey!" Both boys froze. Ray's walk wasn't fast, but it was steady, measured, controlled, like a man who'd walked through minefields and knew which steps mattered. You think that's how men solve things? With blades in the daylight? They didn't answer. One ran. The other tried to stand tall, but his hands shook. Ray leaned in. You got 2 choices. Keep going down that road, or learn something that might keep you breathing a little longer. He didn't wait for a reply. That night, someone spray-painted his garage door a skull, red letters. You don't run this block. Ray washed it off before sunrise. The next morning, he put out 2 folding chairs in his yard, a thermos of coffee, a sign on cardboard, "Talk, don't run." People laughed. A few took pictures. But Ray didn't move. On the 3rd day, a boy named Elijah sat down. Quiet kid. Wore headphones all the time. They didn't talk much. Ray just poured coffee, nodded, and let the silence sit. That was how it started. Not with force. With presence. Asterisk. The next few weeks were a test of both patience and resolve. While the neighborhood wasn't instantly transformed, small ripples had started to form. The louder crowds began dispersing earlier than usual. The blaring music didn't vanish, but its volume dropped. The corner boys still gathered, but their eyes started scanning the sidewalks more often, looking not for cops, but for him. Jackson. He never needed to raise his voice. His presence alone was a message. The way he carried himself, solid, grounded, and unapologetically disciplined, was enough to command attention. And attention, eventually, turned to a strange mix of fear and admiration. But not everyone welcomed the change. One night, Jackson returned from the grocery store and found his gate spray-painted. Big red letters. Go back to war. He didn't flinch. Didn't curse. Didn't even clean it right away. The next morning, he placed a folding chair by the gate and sat there all day. Anyone walking past had to face him and his silence. The 3rd day, the graffiti disappeared. No one admitted to cleaning it. No one mentioned it again. What Jackson didn't know was that his quiet stance was being watched, not just by neighbors, but by people who had given up on the idea that anyone could change this place. One of them was Raymond, a 16-year-old kid who had grown up in the building across from Jackson's. His father had disappeared when he was 5. His mother worked 3 jobs and was hardly home. Raymond noticed that Jackson woke up early, always in that same gray t-shirt tucked into jeans, always with his boots laced tight. He watered the sidewalk trees. He swept his own stoop. He greeted people, even when they didn't respond. One evening, as Jackson returned from his walk, Raymond called out, "Hey, old man, you were a soldier, right?" Jackson nodded. "That's right." Raymond hesitated. "You think that still matters?" Jackson didn't answer right away. He set the grocery bag down and looked the boy in the eye. "It only matters if you live." "Like it still does." That answer, simple and unsentimental, stuck with Raymond. Later that week, Jackson heard a soft knock on his door. It was Rumman. "You got a rake or something?" "I want to help with the sidewalk." Jackson didn't smile, just nodded and handed him the rake. That was how it began. Over the next several weeks, other changes followed. A man named Clyde, who had been a staff sergeant before he lost everything to drinking, started showing up at Jackson's stoop in the mornings. At first, he just sat. Then he helped. Then he started shaving again. Ellen, a retired Navy communications officer, took it upon herself to organize street cleanups. She even called the city about a broken streetlight that had gone ignored for over a year. It was fixed within days. They didn't call themselves anything. There were no slogans, no community meetings or signs, just quiet daily action, like muscle memory, like discipline coming back to life. But every rise invites resistance. One night, the neighborhood shook with gunfire. Not blocks away, right outside Jackson's window. He rolled out of bed with the same reflex he had carried through Fallujah and Kabul. Rifleman crouch, low steps, visual sweep. No rifle now, just muscle memory. He opened the door to see a young man bleeding on the steps. "Raymond, drive by," he groaned. Wrong place, wrong time. Jackson didn't panic. He applied pressure with his shirt, called 911, and stayed until the ambulance arrived. At the hospital, Jackson waited. Hours passed. A nurse finally came out and said Raymond would live, but he'd need rehab. The boy had taken 2 rounds in the arse. Leg. When Jackson visited him the next day, Raymond was half-drugged, eyes glazed. "I thought I was doing better," he muttered. "Guess it doesn't matter." Jackson leaned in. "It matters. You're still here. That means you don't get to quit." Raymond didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. When Jackson returned home, the block was buzzing. People wanted to talk, not just about the shooting, but about what to do next. And for the first time, Jackson spoke to a crowd, not loudly, not with speeches. He just said, "This is our home. We either claim it or lose it." The silence afterward was louder than the shots the night before. By the end of that week, the street was cleaner than it had been in years. Trash cans were placed out front. The smell of fresh paint filled the air. And for the first time, kids played outside after sunset, not because it was safe, but because it was becoming safer. Still, the city had one more test. A new gang moved in. Slick cars, louder weapons, faster money. They weren't afraid of Jackson. They laughed at him. called him Grandpa G.I. Joe, but they didn't understand who he really was. Not yet. They didn't know he once walked point in an ambush zone for 27 days straight without losing a man. They didn't know he had buried friends in deserts far from here and carried their memories like armor. And they didn't know that he had one last move to play. The block had changed, but not without a cost. The new gang, loud and ruthless, tested every boundary Jackson had set. Their jeers echoed through the night, their wheels screeched on cracked pavement, and their shadows stretched long across the Jew. Broken streetlights. One evening, as Jackson sat on his porch, the silence shattered. Engines roared. Doors slammed. Figures appeared from the darkness, like ghosts, only these ghosts carried guns. Jackson stood slowly, his weathered hands steady despite the pounding in his chest. This wasn't Kandahar or Fallujah, but it felt the same, raw and unforgiving. Leader of the gang, a man known as Chains, stepped forward. His grin was sharp, filled with teeth that had never learned mercy. "You're old, Grandpa," Chains sneered. "This block belongs to us now." Jackson's gaze didn't waver. "I'm just the man who'll remind you what respect looks like." The standoff stretched long seconds that felt like hours. Then a gunshot cracked the air. Chaos erupted. Jackson moved with the precision of a soldier who had danced this deadly dance before. He dodged, ducked, and pushed through the crowd. Neighbors watched from windows, some frozen in fear, others clutching their phones ready to call for help. But Jackson didn't wait for help. He was the help. He disarmed a young thug twice his age, using a mix of judo and street fighting he'd picked up in boot camp. He barked orders to the crowd, organizing them to clear the street. A few brave souls stepped forward, emboldened by Jackson's courage. The gang's numbers thinned as the block's residents rallied behind their unlikeliest hero. Sirens wailed in the distance, but Jackson knew the real battle was already won. In the aftermath, the city finally took notice. News crews arrived. Police precincts increased patrols. Community centers offered support programs. But the real change came from the block itself. The teenagers who once ran wild began meeting in the park under Jackson's watchful eye. Local businesses reopened with renewed hope. Streetlights were repaired. Sidewalks swept. Jackson didn't seek credit. He didn't want accolades or headlines. All he wanted was peace, a place where children could play without fear and neighbors could greet each other without suspicion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a young girl approached him. "Thank you," she said simply. Jackson smiled. That's what neighbors do. He turned and looked down the street, the block where order had returned. He wasn't just a soldier who fought wars overseas. He was the man who brought order back to the block.